Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 257, Monday, November the 20th, 2017. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, it looks like the history is catching up to the Clintons. You know, a couple weeks ago I did a video where I laid out all these major corporations that are no longer donating to the Clinton Foundation. And of course that's for two reasons. Number one, they know that the Clintons can no longer deliver on policy initiatives that will benefit them. In other words, they can't pay for play anymore. They also know that the Clinton Foundation is in the crosshairs of some serious investigations, and they do not want to be any more caught up in it than they already are. So that was the first indication that history was catching up to the Clintons. But we also saw about 2 or 3 weeks ago where you started to see these Democratic operatives, these people who usually come out and mimic the Democratic talking points, who go on MSNBC and CNN and ABC and all the rest, and usually do defense, spin. These people are essentially mouthpieces for the Democratic Party. They defend Democratic politicians even in the face of the indefensible, whether it be Maxine Waters or Pelosi or that nut woman down in Florida who wears the crazy hats, whether it's the rotten Reverend Clinton or her husband or any of these deplorable people who are indefensible. These Democratic operatives will still come out and defend them. But we saw a couple weeks ago where they're now openly coming out and calling for Hillary to just go away. They're having a very difficult time raising money, and right now, as long as Hillary is out there with Bill, they still are kind of the face of the Democratic Party. And so what they want is for the Clintons to go away so that people can get that bad taste of the Clintons and that horrible defeat out of their mouth. So you can now see openly, and my guess is that privately, this was probably already had been going on for months, but I imagine that Hillary's decided she doesn't care about the Democratic Party or what they want her to do. She is not going away. She's going to try to keep herself out there in the public eye and try to stay relevant. So it looks like they're now using another tactic in the Democratic Party, and that is just to have their people go out and basically suggest that Hillary needs to go away. So this is another indication that we could see that history is catching up to the Clintons. But finally, last week, the dam broke. With all these allegations, it first started with the Harvey Weinstein scandal, and then, of course, we just started to see many people, big names, coming out of Hollywood as being involved in all sort of sexual allegations. But then it found its way to Washington, largely because of the Roy Moore episode. And that opened up the door to the politicians in Washington. Then we heard about this little secret program that they have to pay the legal fees and settlements for members of Congress who've been, I guess, admitted to committing sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, things like that. So we heard about that. But then we start getting these media pundits, left-wing media pundits, talking about Bill Clinton's past, not just his past for sexual misconduct and harassment and other things. Of course, we know he had to pay Paula Jones $850,000 and basically admit to exposing himself to her. We know about all these types of things, the long affair he had with Jennifer Flowers, with many other people, other women, and things like that. But it was really the Juanita Broaddrick revelations that really woke a lot of people up on the Democratic side, because this was not just your basic harassment. This was actual forced rape. Actual forced rape. And then we had this journalist, a liberal journalist in the New York Times, come out and write an op-ed piece where she said that she believed Juanita. Then you had Chris Hayes of MSNBC put a post out on Facebook where he suggested that Democrats need to go back and revisit that history and admit that they let Slick Willie off the hook. And now you're even hearing some of these pundits when they go on MSNBC and CNN and places like that, not just talking about the crimes of Bill Clinton and regarding his sexual misconduct, but also the fact that Hillary was the one who was handling the bimbo eruptions and who engaged in all sorts of very nasty activities to try to take these women down. In fact, we know from George Stephanopoulos' book, which he wrote many years ago. Remember, he was the press secretary under Bill Clinton, and he wrote in his book that he was in the room when Hillary went off the handle about all these bimbo allegations, and she decided that she would take control, and she basically said that these women had to be shut up, had to be put in the grave, these women had to be silenced, and that she would destroy them. She said that she would destroy them. And so that began her campaign of destroying the women making these allegations against Bill Clinton. George Stephanopoulos was in the room, and he put it in his book. So now we can see that the history is catching up to the Clintons. And as we go back down that road, exploring the many crimes of the Clinton crime family, the sex crimes, the money crimes, the many crimes they committed in government with the TowerGate scandal and the land deal scandals and all these other scandals that they were involved in, we wonder if they're going to stumble along a few dead bodies along the way as we go down that road of history. Maybe Ron Brown, maybe Vince Foster, and some of those. So these are all things that are also in the Clintons' past, in their history. But history is catching up to the Clintons. And at this point, I would say that with the recent revelations about Juanita Broaddrick, and the reason that she's back in the news, by the way, is because she's got a new book coming out, which is called Put Some Ice on It, which is the comment that Bill Clinton made to her as he left the room after raping her. He apparently had bit her lip and bloodied her lip, and so he told her to put some ice on it, and then he walked out of the room after violently raping her. So her new book is coming out, and this is going to rekindle this entire event. And those in the liberal media who defended Bill Clinton those years ago are going to have to come out now, because we are now in the post-Weinstein era. And in the post-Weinstein era, all these types of things have to be viewed differently and commented upon differently, or you'll be out of touch with the politically correct environment that they on the left have created. They're being hung by their own petard. And that includes the Clintons. Soon, Bill Clinton will no longer be asked to give any speeches. I imagine if we checked his schedule, we'd probably find that people are already canceling speeches that they had him scheduled to give. You're going to see the money dry up. No one will be paying Slick Willie to give speeches anymore. He will be persona non grata. People will be wanting to stay away from him. And the Rotten Reverend Clinton, her deal is no better, and it's about to get worse. So there we go. History is catching up to the Clintons. Finally. Now, a very good friend of Hillary Clinton, Al Franken, the former writer for Saturday Night Live, stand-up comedian, failed stand-up comedian, and Minnesota senator, is in very deep trouble. Obviously, with the allegations coming out about what he did, and of course we have pictures to prove it, as well as many other things that he's written over the years on Saturday Night Live and things like that, about raping Leslie Stahl and things like that. This is all coming out. But the Rotten Reverend Clinton made the comment this week when she was asked about Al Franken that he doesn't need to resign. He's my friend. Yes, the Rotten Reverend Clinton is a very good friend of Al Franken, because, as I mentioned before, the Rotten Reverend Clinton is very good friends with all kinds of people. In fact, it seems that everyone around the Rotten Reverend Clinton is somehow some sort of pedophile or sexual deviant. Whether it's her best friend, her love muffin, Huma Abedin, and her husband, who's now in jail for his sex crimes, Anthony's Weiner, whether it's her husband, the rapist, whether it's Al Franken, whether it's Mr. Weinstein, regardless, everyone, apparently, the Podestas, apparently everyone around the Rotten Reverend is some kind of freak, some kind of sexual predator, some kind of sexual miscreant. And we can only assume she is one as well. Maybe we should ask Huma about that to get the details. But anyway, Al Frankengroper, if you remember, he barely won that Senate race in Minnesota. It was so close that they had to have a recount, had to recount every county, and he ended up winning by like 200 votes or something, 150, 200 votes. Very, very close. And he's not terribly popular there. And with the way that Donald Trump actually did much better in Minnesota than was expected, a little bit more red on that map than what there has been previously, it's a pretty good bet that Al Frankengroper, who is up for re-election in 2018, that Al Frankengroper will most likely, in fact almost certainly, lose that Senate seat. Now my guess is Democrats are probably behind the scenes telling him that he should step aside and let a Democrat run who can actually win. But my guess is he is not going to do that. He is going to try to, like all politicians, hold on to his power as long as he can, even in the face of certain defeat. They'll be the last person to accept their defeat because they're egomaniacal, crazy people. So Al Frankengroper will be the next Democratic Senate seat to go Republican in 2018. Thank you very much, Al Frankengroper and Rotten Reverend Clinton, for delivering that Senate seat to the Republicans in 2018 in advance. Appreciate it. Watching things in Lebanon, as I told you about a week ago, this new Saudi prince has really ramped up the militarism, and that's why I said there's some danger that we have to watch out for, that he doesn't get too big in the britches and believing that we'll back him on everything he's doing. Yes, they did conduct that purge, and that was awfully good, and there's some other good things that are happening between us and that kingdom, but to launch a direct war into Lebanon would be a very bad idea. And in the past week and a half or so, there has been two bombings, one in Bahrain and the other in Saudi Arabia. Some people are suggesting these may be false flags. Maybe. I don't know. Could be. But regardless of what the cause of this is, things are definitely heating up in Lebanon. Lebanon, essentially, the number one fighting force there is, of course, Hezbollah, which is the Iranian-backed surrogate army. And the big problem that you have is if you go in there and if Saudis go in there with troops on the ground in Lebanon, you are going to greatly heat up the entire region. And you could also see this will automatically cause massive uprisings again in Bahrain, which is kind of dangerous because that's the home of the American 7th Fleet. And so we saw uprisings there 2 or 3 times back in 2013, 2014, 2015. So this is not something that you want to exacerbate at this point. So we're going to have to watch the events unfolding in Lebanon. My guess is that President Trump has people on it, and they're probably telling the young prince just to keep his powder dry and just to, continue with what they're doing. As far as defending themselves, they certainly have to do that. Could be missiles fired into Saudi Arabia from Lebanon. This is obviously can happen and probably has happened. But to have a full-scale invasion of Lebanon would only create a really, really bad situation. It would spread probably throughout the Middle East. I'm pretty sure Trump's team does not want to start another war in the Middle East, does not want to expand what's already happening. He's trying to wind things down there. So, again, you would have Iraq, Iran, Qatar, Syria, every one of these areas in the Middle East would be affected by this if they were to expand this war in Lebanon. So I don't think it'll happen. I think Trump's people have probably can tighten the screws down on the Saudi prince so that he doesn't get out of hand. Going to have to keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't get a little bit too big for his britches. But they did come out and make a statement, which certainly had to come from him, this past week, saying that this most recent bomb that blew up in Saudi Arabia was an act of war. So this is kind of dangerous talk. Hopefully it's just propaganda, but we will keep watching the situation in Lebanon as it develops. Also, I mentioned in this story a few days back that we learned that there's an agency within the government that uses taxpayer money to pay off the accusers of sexual misconduct by members of Congress and their staffers. This, of course, outraged a lot of people. Well, if you want to go to sign a petition to force the government to release the names of those members of Congress and staffers who have had sex allegations made against them, which resulted in payouts of taxpayer money somewhere in the $15 million range in the last 9 years, about 260 some odd suits they've paid out. If you want to sign a petition forcing Congress to release the names of those rats, then there is a petition. You can go to it, dickmorris.com, DICKMORRIS, dickmorris.com. You will find a link to that petition where you can sign that petition and hopefully get the Congress, force them to release the names of the perps, because they should have to repay the taxpayers. We shouldn't be paying to settle their sexual misconduct suits. They should be handled the way they're handled with anyone else, in the public, in a civil court hearing, and they should have to pay their own damages. Why should we be paying their damages? And if so, we certainly have the right to know whose damages we paid. If we paid for it, we definitely have a right to know whose sexual misconduct fines, essentially, or settlements that we had to pay. So if you want to sign that petition, go on over to dickmorris.com. You know, the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity have been working pretty hard following up on the Franken and other peoples who've been examining the hack, which was attributed to Guccifer 2.0, which we were told happened from Russia, that Guccifer 2.0 is some sort of a Russian operative. Veteran intelligence, the VIPs have been doing a lot of work on that, and they have now done some speeds on download speeds from Europe, downloading within a LAN, downloading within the United States, to take a look at download speeds, because the download speed of the files, if you recall, was of the Guccifer 2.0 files was over 22 megabytes per second, which they found from doing these tests is impossible, can't be done. The best that they could do, the average was around 11 per second, megabytes per second, and the average was 11, the best was 15. That's the best that you can do, and as far as the download speed outside of the LAN, the local area network. But when you go into the local area network and push a thumb drive or flash drive or whatever you want to call it directly into the computer and download from there, guess what the download speed is? 22.3, almost exactly what the download speed was of those files extracted from the server that was attributed to the hack by Guccifer 2.0. What does this tell us? Well, there you go. There is the almost exact download speed of those files that happens when you do it within the local area network, the LAN. So, I think that's just another strong point in the case that those files were not hacked by the Russians. They were, in fact, the files were downloaded from the inside directly to a thumb drive or some sort of digital storage device. Now, if you remember, in my Seth Rich video, part 2, I suggested what hardly anybody else that I've heard of has suggested, which is that the murder of Seth Rich, which people attribute to a failed robbery, may have been a successful robbery. But what the people who murdered him wanted was not money or a watch or a gold chain or his credit cards. Maybe what they wanted was a flash drive. Maybe he had data on that flash drive that he was going to share with someone, and they decided to take it. That would explain the scuffle. Maybe he had it around his neck. A lot of people wear their flash drives around their neck. So this might explain why there was a struggle. Because if they had guns, there shouldn't have been any struggle. But there was something they wanted to get off of him, which is why there would have been a struggle. Otherwise, they just would have shot him. But no, they had to have a struggle with him. We know there was a struggle. What would they have wanted? It wasn't his cash, his watch, his credit card, or his gold chain. So what was it? Well, I suggested many months ago, 2-3 weeks after the murder, that maybe what they wanted was something else. And I suspected at that time it was a flash drive or a thumb drive with data on it, downloaded files. And now when you look at the fact that the download speeds are almost perfectly the same as the speeds that we know that were used to download the files that we were told were done by Guccifer 2.0, when we now know they weren't, and Guccifer 2.0 is a myth. Guccifer 2.0 was likely created by CrowdStrike. It's the exact download speed, which gives more evidence that it was done from the inside, and that certainly had to be Seth Rich. So it may have been a successful robbery. Remember, we also learned just about a month ago that even though the DNC did not announce that they had been hacked until the end of April the 29th, we now know that the breaches of the DNC servers occurred as early as the end of March. And we also learned that Seymour Hersh told us that he had heard that his sources inside the FBI told him that they were pretty sure it was Seth Rich who downloaded those files from the DNC. So if he were downloading all them files, but Seymour Hersh was making the point that all WikiLeaks got was a sample, that there was much more that Seth Rich never had a chance to get to them. So maybe when you look at the time when these downloads started, which is at the end of March, when the theft of these emails began back in March, to the time when they ended, which was just before Seth Rich's death, about 2 weeks before, is when they stopped being downloaded or taking off the server. And that length of time, he probably downloaded a lot of files. But what WikiLeaks released was probably only a small portion of them. So it was my contention a long time ago that possibly Seth Rich had much, much more. And the files that he had, more files that he had, were probably on a storage device. Maybe that night he was going to meet somebody and give them that flash drive with the emails, more information on it. Or maybe someone just knew that he carried it around with him. But whatever the case, it's my contention that the murder of Seth Rich was not a failed robbery, but rather a successful robbery. And the thing that they wanted from Seth Rich was probably on his body, on his person, was probably information, and was probably on a thumb drive, flash drive, whatever you want to call it. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. Well, you know, the Rotten Reverend Clinton should sue Fusion GPS and Glenn Simpson. You know why? Because Glenn Simpson was representing the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign by putting together the dossier for them. Hillary Rotten Clinton was the client of Fusion GPS of putting together the phony dossier. But guess what else Glenn Simpson was doing? As we know, we learned that Glenn Simpson was also working for the Russian government on the Magnitsky Act. Now, we learned that he met with Veselnitskaya, who he had working for him on behalf of the Magnitsky Act and the Russian government. We learned that she met with Glenn Simpson before and after going to that secret meeting on that day. We also learned that the memo that she was reading from for her talking points came from Glenn Simpson himself. Well, we've learned a little bit more in the last couple of days about what may have been in them memos. And one of the things that was put into those memos was the fact that there may have been some illegal campaign contributions made to the Clinton campaign. Now, this was never shared with anyone in that secret meeting according to all the people who were there. But according to Glenn Simpson and his testimony this past week, it has apparently come out that he had, in that memo, he had made a point, as these points were made on this memo, that there may have been illegal campaign contributions made to the rotten Reverend Clinton campaign. So what does that tell you? Well, that tells you that Glenn Simpson Fusion GPS is being paid $12 million by the rotten Reverend Clinton to do political opposition research for her side. At the same time, he's getting paid by the Russian government to push the Magnitsky Act to get it repealed, and he's using Veselnitskaya, and he's giving her the talking points that he wrote, and part of the talking points he gave her is that he's saying that there may have been illegal campaign contributions made to Hillary. So he's representing Hillary on one hand and getting paid over $12 million to represent Hillary. At the same time, he's giving Veselnitskaya information that there may have been illegal campaign contributions made to the rotten Reverend Clinton. Now, if I'm the rotten Reverend Clinton and I find this out, well, I've got a lawsuit against Glenn Simpson. Your attorney is not allowed to work on your behalf while simultaneously working on behalf of someone else who would be your enemy or your opposition. You're not allowed to do that. It violates legal standards. Of course, Fusion GPS is not a law firm, are they? They're only a law firm when they want to be. When they want attorney-client privilege, they're a law firm. When they don't want to get sued for conflict of interest, they're not a law firm. Depends on which side of the street they're on that particular day. The rotten Reverend Clinton may want to call Mark Elias. Yes, indeed. Oh, boy. Well, the dumbass of the week. Well, who do you think the dumbass of the week is this week? Let me see. Oh, boy. It's the rotten Reverend Clinton. She wins dumbass of the week. And how did she accomplish this? She's got a hell of a lot of contributions, certainly, but she's never quite made it there. But this week, I have to give the rotten Reverend Clinton dumbass of the week. The rotten Reverend, the kooky, senile grandma, the career criminal married to a rapist, was addressing an audience in Arkansas, where she bragged about the fact that her husband never tweeted during his presidency. Well, of course he never tweeted during his presidency. You idiot! Twitter wasn't invented until 6 years after he left office. Of course he didn't tweet. It didn't exist. And that, rotten Reverend, shows you're completely out of touch. Out of touch with everything. And that makes you, rotten Reverend, the dumbass of the week. Congratulations. Go get that umbrella. You are going to need it. Storm clouds are brewing, as you'll see in just a moment. People are now calling for the arrest of Gloria Allred. She got destroyed on the media this past week trying to defend her crazy client, Beverly Young Nelson. Didn't help that Beverly Young Nelson's stepson came out and made a video, 2 videos, one where he said she's probably lying and she's a money-grubbing whore, and the second one where he came out and said that he'd been receiving death threats and various other things for coming out and making the video. Gloria Allred is being challenged on whether or not the note in the yearbook was a forgery. She's still resisting giving up that yearbook for it to be looked at by some handwriting analysts. Now, what she is doing here, I don't know if she realized it, but she's already under 2 criminal investigations for misconduct as an attorney. But at this point, when you do something like this in a political election, that is a crime. It is the crime of election tampering. Election tampering is a crime, Mrs. Allred, or Ms. Allred. It is a crime. It's also fraud. So, that's actually 2 crimes. And so people are now calling for 2 things. Number 1, to let people examine that yearbook, but also to have Gloria Allred, of course, be charged with the crimes, assuming they can prove that that she knew about the signature, Roy Moore's signature, being forged, which it appears it was. Okay, so we find out that Jeff the Flake, the Arizona senator, who's no longer going to be the senator after 2018 because he's not going to run because he knows he's going to lose. We find out now that before becoming a senator, he was a foreign lobbyist working for a Ukrainian firm which had ties to Iran. He's saying now that he didn't know that Iran held a 15% stake in Rosso, the Nambian uranium company. But Iran has owned its share of this company since the 1970s, and that's easy to find out through disclosure, and it's something he and his firm, or the firm he was working for as a lobbyist, should have known that. It's one of the things that they look at before they sign a deal like that. So he's probably lying. Then we have Chris Ratboy Wallace on Sunday morning claiming Trump is a threat to the free press. No, Ratboy, Chris Wallace, Trump's not a threat to the free press. He's a threat to the fake press. And that is you, Chris Ratboy Wallace, and all your friends. We remember your daddy. He was a socialist, a card-carrying member, and we know what your stripes are, sir. Ratboy. Nancy Pelosi questions Trump's fitness to be president. You know what? I think I'll just leave that one to you in the comments section and see what you all think about that. Nancy Pelosi questions Trump's fitness to be president. I'll check the comments section to see what you all think about that one. But finally, last and not least, most importantly, more unbelievable information coming out about this FBI informant and what he is going to show and tell in his little hearing in the next couple of weeks, if not sooner. Not only does he have audio tapes of Russian officials talking about the fact that they're going to use the Clintons as a tool for bribery to get the uranium deal done, but he now has video evidence of actually the briefcases full of money that they're going to use. He's got the videos of the briefcases full of money that are going to be used to bribe the Clintons. Briefcases full of money, headed straight for the Clinton Foundation and Slick Willie's wallet. There you go. Things could not be getting any worse. As I said, the history is catching up to the Clintons. Pretty soon the wall around them will be completely crumbled. It will not exist. Slick Willie will not be able to show his face in public. No one will be paying him any speaking fees. He'll be persona non grata, along with his wife. And it won't be long that they'll be getting 2 tickets to another type of paradise. And it's not the islands, I can assure you that. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you back here tomorrow night. Goodbye.